thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you. And I mean, you spoke a lot on, I mean, your sessions, and I believe that the audience are actually taking one or two things. What caught me there as well is the deal. Actually, we are going to talk about that later. So basically, Mr. Banji, would you like to tell the audience where you work? Then what do you do? What do you do in the organization? And why is the organization so important?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I'm fortunate to work for Africa Finance Corporation, and we are a multilateral development finance institution.
Great.
We're about 16 years old as an institution, and we are Pan-African in the sense that African countries are members of AFC.
Okay.
So several African countries are signatory to the international treaty that
Okay.
creates AFC. But we are also private sector led. So the way we are constructed, we have both sovereigns and private sector coming together to do development finance. So if you think about the PPP model, we're a good example of that. We have done a lot of things across Africa since the last 16 years. We've invested in about 33, 34 African countries.
Yeah.
We've deployed at least 13, $14 billion of financing across all these countries during that time. We are rated A3 by Moody's, so we are one of Africa's highest rated investment grade entities on the continent. And we're so proud of what we've achieved in the last 15, 16 years. It's been a good journey.
Great.
So far.
That's wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do at the company, really?
So for me, I'm a senior director and the head of treasury, and I have responsibility for all our capital market activities, funding, relationship with our global banks, investors, rating agencies. I also have responsibility for our financial institutions business, which we're growing and has grown rapidly over the last couple of years. You know, our investor relations function also reports through me. So that's primarily what I do for AFC. My own personal background is I'm an economist by training, an accountant also, and importantly, I'm a CFA charter holder. So I used to be president of the CFA in Nigeria for many years, and now I sit on the board of CFA Institute globally as well. So I've done a lot in the capital market, and I think my motivation is to see African capital markets develop, to see how we can help bring global capital to Africa. And AFC provides the perfect platform for me to achieve that. And that's really one thing that I think AFC has done very well in the last couple of years.
That's great. I think I would want you to have a kind of a distinction between what are the people, or let's say, what are the corporation that can approach you for financing? Because that's very, very important. Is it the countries? Is it going to be the CBN of those countries? Or is it going to be blue chip companies? You know, I mean, the audience will want to know so that they will be able to know where they fit and to be able to know how to approach.
So the reality is anyone. You know, all those names you mentioned, we actually do interact with them. It's anyone in the sense that even if you have a very beautiful idea that can solve a major problem in Africa, and you walked into AFC to have a conversation, we'll sit with you and see how do we develop this idea? How does this idea become a project that is bankable?
Yes.
And more importantly, how do we attract global capital to support that project? So that can start from an individual that has a brilliant idea, and we work with that individual in order to fine-tune the idea and make it into a bankable project. It could be a government. You know, again, when we're on stage, I cited example of what we did with the government of Egypt as recent as last week. You know, we support so many African sovereigns in helping them to solve important problems. Government of Nigeria, we support. Egypt, I mentioned, South Africa, so many entities across the continent, we've supported them as well. It could also be central banks. So we are increasingly supporting African central banks. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we hosted African central banks in Marrakesh, where we had a discussion with them about the kind of counter-cyclical support that we can provide to central banks across the continent, especially in a difficult time like this when there's demand for hard currency, everybody
Yes,
needs
absolutely.
liquidity, and we have access to that liquidity. How do we pass it on and help them
Yeah.
to achieve their monetary policy? So it could be anyone. The key thing for us is that any project we're doing must satisfy two objectives. One, it must be viable,
Great.
and then importantly, it must have a huge developmental impact.
Impact.
Once we tick those two boxes, then we're the right party to talk to.
Great. I think that will bring me to the next question, which is on the theme of this conference. You know, you mentioned impact, and we are all looking at how to transition from the form of financing we are having today to be more responsible. So I will ask you, what do you feel and about the theme on that part? Then also, how has your corporation been able to impact this wonderful, the green, transitioning that we are looking for? How have you been able to do that? So, maybe looking at it from the aspect of your the financing you are doing and so on and so forth.
I think that's a good question because whenever I talk to my team, for example, I tell them that, look, the world has changed a lot in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years ago, we could just go out, say we're raising funding,
Absolutely.
general corporate purpose. We're not, investors are not even interested in what you are using it for.
Yeah.
And over time, we started seeing the transition in the world of finance where people are more interested in what problem are we solving.
Yes.
We're not just giving you dollars. You need to tell us what you are going to use it for. Are you going to use it for energy transition? Are you going to use it to solve important problems that, humanity needs to solve, the
Right.
SDG goals, all that stuff? And I keep telling my people that there will come a time where if you want to raise money internationally, people will ask you, you have to explain what you're using it for. So this whole transition away from general corporate balance sheet funding into specific funding that
Yeah.
has to do with solving important ESG goals or SDG goals has come to stay. And I think that's the future. And that's the direction of capital markets. So even for us, when we are going to the market now, we're talking about issuing green bonds. I did cite that. We're one of Africa's first multilaterals to issue green bonds. We issued ours out of Switzerland. And if I look at what we're doing in terms of even our investment portfolio, even when we are lending, we're beginning to ask people questions around sustainability, developmental impact of what you're doing. I cited the fact that we're Africa's largest owner of renewable assets today through our Lekela platform, which is a joint venture between ourselves, Mazda, and Infinity in Egypt. And under that platform, we've grown a huge pipeline of assets, green assets, which over time will be a huge platform on the continent. We've done that as well with our Arise platform in Gabon, in Togo, in Benin, and we're doing that across several sectors. And the key thing for us is we need to industrialize Africa. The only way to take Africa out of poverty is to industrialize. This whole notion of primary commodities, export it out, and they process
get
it
the
and add
finished goods.
value elsewhere, and then we import it back as finished good, has to stop. We need to create the jobs on the continent, and that to us is the reason why we go to work every day at Africa Finance Corporation.
Great.
How do we change that narrative? And that's the kind of impact that we're having through our activities.
I think that's wonderful. I want to get the last question, and I believe after that I will be wrapping up this interview with you. Basically, Islamic finance. You mentioned a lot on stage, and what people have been able to, the misconception they have, and everything. You had your corporation. What have you been able to do in terms of, inculcating Islamic finance into your financing activities as well?
So again, I did mention we've issued a Sukuk bond in the past. So we are quite experienced in tapping the liquidity that's available in the Islamic finance world. I honestly think we can do more, and I definitely know we will do more
Yeah.
in that space, because that's an area where, as part of our investor engagement program, we're constantly talking to investors across the world
Great.
to ensure that we meet their needs, and we definitely will be tapping that market again in
Yeah.
due course. But more importantly is the partnerships. I mean, we have a very strong relationship with so many Islamic banks. So Islamic Development Bank, for example, for many years was a lender to AFC. So
Wow.
we've borrowed again in Islamic format from Islamic Development Bank. We have a very strong relationship with the entire group, be it the Islamic Development Bank, the ICD, or the ISEC.
Yeah.
And again, we've looked working with them around how do we support trade.
Great.
In partnership with them, we're doing projects across Africa where we're co-financing transactions in Islamic format. And with their own expertise, we're also developing internal expertise in the area of Islamic finance. So if from where I sit, I see significant amount of growth ahead of us in our own operations, in our own capital market activities. I definitely see a lot of growth in the Islamic finance
Great.
area for us at AFC.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you for having this interview with me.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.